Well, you know how far that flew? Right straight up the management chain on the finance side to say that IT is not being cooperative. They mistook the requirements, therefore they should change it. Well, today what we want to do is talk about what requirements really are. And requirements is kind of an odd term. Requirements in the normal world, before IT basically co opted the idea, is that I'm going to require you to do things. That's kind of like a contract type term. In other words, when I sign a contract with you, each party to the contract is required to do certain items to fulfill the contract. Well, the challenge with using the term in an IT setting or in a project management setting is simply that when you have requirements for a particular project, they're more features, they're more desires, they are more, this is what we'd like the program to do. Calling them requirements kind of puts the contract edge on the relationship between IT and the entity that's being worked on for the project that IT is doing. And typically my experience has been in finance, so I'll gravitate towards examples in finance. But let's talk about the idea of collecting those requirements. Many corporations, while they attempt to do agile, many times they'll do pseudo agile in the respect that they'll call them scrum meetings in the morning, but they'll do everything else waterfall. They'll collect all the requirements at first. They'll, get it all scoped and cost and typical waterfall nonsense. And the reason I call it nonsense is simply because a lot of times you can't know the exact, let's call them requirements or requests at the beginning. And the reason you can't know that is because it's never been done before. Okay, you might have an application that you're sunsetting that has a lot of the features built into it that the business wants. But at the same time, you don't necessarily know all the requirements it's going to take in order to take that business process and fully put it in the new software. So I recoil a lot at the term requirements. And here I want to illustrate what it means by that. I was working on a large project. We're talking a project in the millions. In fact, it ended up over $100 million in total cost. Okay, so you can see it was an enterprise deployment, and we were working on a component of that. And we had been working for quite a while on every component of this and trying to get it pushed over the top. And we had certain, because I was working on finance side, we had certain business requirements, in quotes, that we wanted fulfilled. And slowly as IT began coming back saying, well, this application can't do that particular thing. Well, so in finance we're saying, well, wait a minute. You told us that this new whiz-bang application would do everything that our old application would do, and all we're doing is kind of porting it over. Well, that is seldom ever the case, to be frank about it. You never adopt a brand new package and have it do everything that your customized application that it's replacing could do. And this particular application was replacing an app that had been totally customized in-house, written from scratch, and developed by a very, very smart individual that was in finance. And they had, built this program, and it was adopted by IT, and it became on one of the programs on the hit list to consolidate into a new COTS package. Typical type of story, okay? And being a very typical type of story, here you get to the point where eventually the things that it was supposed to do in the original requirements list are slowly knocked off as things that can't be done or things that have to be done differently. Well, I remember one particular requirement, and I want to use this to illustrate how not only requirements can fall by the wayside, but requirements can be so badly misinterpreted. There was this particular application processed finance data. And in the processing of the finance data, it at the end of each month would get the monthly actuals, or the actual data that was run during the month. And this was a planning tool, so you had your plan data, and at the end of the month you compared your plan data with your actual data. Well, in processing the actual data as it came in, there are parameters that you apply to the data. And you say, if it comes from this account, do this with it. If it comes from this particular element in the data, then do this other thing. And there was this one particular element that classified the data in a certain way. And the requirements from the finance people were that if it says this value, do this. If it says this value, do that. But if it's blank, do that. Okay. So we get into the final testing. Now here, understand, we're basically doing a waterfall approach here. And the final testing, this is user acceptance testing. And we find that about $3 million were not processed correctly. And so as the users are testing this and trying to discover why the $3 million was put where the finance didn't expect it to be put, they found that this particular field, which was blank, wasn't being treated properly for 3 records. And these 3 records were different values each, but they totaled about $3 million. And so we brought it up to finance, to IT, that, hey, these 3 records were misprocessed. We said in our original requirements to you that if it was blank, that it should be treated a certain way, and you didn't. You put it in the miscellaneous over here, which was basically a none of the above category. Instead of saying these values explicitly were expressed, and if it's blank, do this. Finance didn't expect another treatment of it beyond this blank. And so what had happened is when the original document was put together, the person putting together the document, which was from IT, and she was very, very good at her job, and she's since retired, but in putting together the document, she says, if the value here is null, and all you IT people out there are seeing where this story is going, if the value is null, do this. So what was happening is those 3 records were not null. In other words, they had a value in it before. The user had just hit the delete key to blank it out, which doesn't leave it as a null value anymore. So the null value setting was not within those fields. They were literally blank. And so what finance expected was that if there was not a value in here, that if a value did not exist in that was previously mentioned, that it was this value, this value, this value, do those things. If none of these values above were in this field, then do a certain thing. Well, when you interpret it as narrowly as the value has to be null, these 3 records fell down to another condition where these were put in just a miscellaneous bucket of records we can't classify, okay, which was set for previous fields and just was set on this particular field too. So we said, hey, we said it when it was blank, it was supposed to be treated this way and go to this bucket. And you didn't do that, so fix it. And they said, well, wait a minute, the requirements document says if this value is null, do this, but those values weren't null, they were blank. And when the argument ensued with IT, the programmer said, it is a change to requirements. The requirements document said it was supposed to be null. We accurately programmed the system to do exactly what the requirements said. Therefore, we will go to deployment with it this way, and you will then put in a change request to have it changed after deployment. Well, you know how far that flew? Right straight up the management chain on the finance side to say that IT is not being cooperative. They mistook the requirements, and mistaking the requirements, therefore they should change it. Okay, can you see what the contract did to that particular project at that point? Everybody was frazzled. I mean, literally, the project was 1.5 times its budget. It had already taken 3 years longer than IT said it was going to be. Everybody was very frustrated at this point, and this was just another fly in the ointment that created even more frustration. The eventual outcome of this was that the finance people, won over this particular programmer. The programmer changed it. We went and tested it. It went fine, and we deployed it with the change. And we argued about it longer than it took the programmer to fix it, which is kind of an odd thing, but that's generally what happens when you collect your requirements and negotiate a contract based on those requirements, and then discover problems later, especially way down in user acceptance testing. That's generally what happens. So that is the harm that can be done when requirements are collected way at the beginning of a project and everything is negotiated at the beginning. The triple constraints of, scope and cost and schedule, when they start getting broken, everybody gets frustrated. If you are able then to do an agile project and remain focused on the fact that there's going to be change at all times, and be willing to just make those changes as they come and work with the customer all along the way to quickly prototype and quickly deploy little pieces, you're going to get around this oops, we found a bad requirement way at the end, and be able to fix it as you go. Hope you've enjoyed this little discussion. Hope to see you again. Thanks.